Our kind of broad overriding theme is addressing the protein deficit in Africa. It's one of the largest growing populations in the world, if not the world. It's the largest growing population in the world. And there is a real lack of protein, especially in the area that we're working in. We're mainly focused in Mozambique and Malawi. But kind of second to that is the way that you address the protein deficit. And for that, we're wanting to find something that is a sustainable solution, and that leads us to aquaculture. Mozambique has not really had a real baseline industry of aquaculture, and by being an anchor farm where we are, sort of overcoming the hurdles of availability of inputs, we're kind of leading the way and showing how you can produce protein sustainably, and being a baseline for small-scale farmers to grow around us and sort of be able to use us as a platform to build their own small farming practices. As a protein producer, our main kind of goal is to provide fresh, affordable, nutritious protein. And that's firstly, it's a production problem, and then secondarily, it's a logistics and distribution problem. And we have to solve both of those, being where we are. But sort of separate to that protein question is around this idea of industry building. How are we supporting a growth of aquaculture generally? And that then services farmers by providing them with inputs. One of the most technical parts of the tilapia production process is the hatchery. It's breeding your tilapia and growing fry. And if we cover that, we're then able to supply these farmers with fingerlings. And that's a really capital intensive part that can be solved for them. Sometimes the issue of feed is just a question of availability. If we've got a feed storage shed, for us to bring in a little bit of extra feed is just a marginal cost. But if we weren't there, these farmers would have to bring in their feed themselves, which makes it completely prohibitive. So the idea of us as an anchor farm is to kind of act as this catalyst where you're conquering some of those hurdles and creating availability. And that's sitting on the production side. And then from a market building perspective, if we're going out there and building markets, sometimes it's as simple as going into a new space and saying, what do these vendors need in order to be able to sell our fish? And sometimes it's something like a cooler box. And so we have our own kind of market development programs where we supply these vendors with training and cooler boxes, and then we seed the fish into those markets. And it's kind of building this practice of eating tilapia as part of your staple diet. And if that then becomes the norm, you have really solid reasons for a farmer to be producing in the first place. And so we really try to think of ourselves as an industry builder to solve the protein deficit. It's not just about what we do directly, but also about what we provide indirectly. The hope is that it can be replicated. I think that when you go into the sort of literature and you look for like a theory of industry development or anything in the academic space that talks to this, it's kind of minimal. Most businesses tend to operate off an industrialized base. And what we're doing is we're going into a society that is fundamentally agrarian. These communities aren't industrialized at all. And we're building the beginning of an industrialization in an area that we hope will be quite sustainable. And if you can demonstrate it, then the hope is that you can show that it can be done, and then it can be replicated. So that's really the legacy that, I guess, the really long term that we're wanting to have. For us in particular, we have a very soft spot for the Goodwell due diligence process. I know that isn't what you would necessarily expect. But Goodwell has a real focus on people. Like in some ways, the due diligence was being done on us as the team. Because when you operate in these really risky environments, it's not so much do you have the risk? Of course you have the risk. It's about how well can the team cope with it? Can you be resilient enough as a group of people to overcome that risk, to mitigate it, to use it to your advantage, to do whatever is needed to kind of bring success into your narrative? And that's a people-based question. And Goodwell really shifted their focus onto us in that process. And it's kind of informed some of the way that we've approached our own growth. We've really recognized that in some ways, if you're not a people-first business, you can put all of the rest of it in place. But when you're in these places, you need that human connection to be able to build something that is sustainable. And I guess that has come from the way that Goodwell approached us in the first place.